The Ash Kiln Court gathered to watch Queen Maerelle Voss break the thing that had eaten her youth. They did not know that yet. They saw only a woman past the bright age of songs, standing before the black Mourning Kiln, with ash in the folds of her gray silk and silver threaded through her dark hair. They saw tired hands, a mouth that no longer smiled easily, eyes that had learned to endure the exact weight of a room before anyone spoke. They saw the Queen Odran Thale had set aside. By sunset, they expected to see his new bride. By moonrise, they expected Maerelle to be gone. "Strike cleanly, royal potteress," Sava Drex said, placing the iron keyline hammer into Maerelle's hands. The court should not be forced to watch age tremble before renewal. A few nobles laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because cruelty sounded safer when it came from someone powerful. Maerelle accepted the hammer. It was heavier than she remembered. Once she had stood beside this kiln for 3 nights, while Dragon King Odran burned with fever after the Eastern War. Once she had pressed her palms to its black clay throat, while the court's last ember faltered whispering prayers into heat until her voice broke. Once the kiln had answered her. No record named those nights. Court records preferred cleaner things. Queen failed to renew royal fire. Queen weakened by grief. Queen no longer fit for ash rites. Queen to be dismissed before second bonding ceremony. Odran Thale sat on the dragonbone throne, above the kiln steps, unmoving beneath a mantle of black scale and old gold. At 38, he was still the kind of man courts feared before they admired him, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, carved by command, with amber eyes that looked forged rather than born. The dragon mark along his right hand glowed faintly beneath his glove, a pulse of banked fire he had not allowed anyone to question. He did not look away from Maerelle. That was worse. If he had looked aside, she could have hated him more cleanly. Sava's voice sharpened. Her Majesty delays. Not Her Majesty. Truly. Not anymore. The title had become a courtesy with teeth. Behind Sava, the new bride's white veil waited behind a screen of red ash silk. Lady Iserin Vale had not yet entered the court, but everyone had already seen enough of her through rumor, 19 years younger than Maerelle, untouched by grief, chosen for beauty, fertile blood, and a dragon line bright enough to flatter a prey, failing throne. Maerelle did not blame the girl. She had learned long ago that courts made weapons from women, before the women understood they had been sharpened. "Break it," Odran said. Only 2 words. No anger, no softness. That had always been his cruelty. He could cut without raising his voice. Maerelle looked up at him. "Why?" The court stilled. Sava's fingers tightened around the chain of kiln keys at her waist. Odran's gaze narrowed. "Because the Mourning Kiln is dead. Because its ash rites failed under your keeping. Because Thale must not begin a new bonding beneath the shadow of what you let weaken." What you let weaken. Maerelle felt those words settle into the places where years had already been taken from her. The kiln behind her was tall as a chapel door, black clay veined with dull red, its mouth sealed by a circular stone, marked with tiny sleeping dragons. The Mourning Kiln did not burn ash. It priced survival in years. Once, when Maerelle was younger, she had thought the carvings beautiful. Tonight they looked like children curled around a wound. She turned back to it. "I kept this court alive," she said quietly. Sava exhaled as if pitying her. "You attended the kiln, yes. That was your duty. Duty." The word swallowed 23 years. Duty was what they called Maerelle, sitting beside Odran during the fever when no healer dared touch his burning skin. Duty was what they called her, standing through 3 winters of ash famine, while nobles blamed her for thin fire and still warmed their hands at flames she had coaxed awake. Duty was what they called the miscarried hopes she had buried without ceremony, because the court disliked a queen who grieved where witnesses could see. Duty was what they called every strand of silver in her hair. Maerelle lifted the hammer. Beneath Odran's glove, the dragon mark on his hand flickered, once as if some buried part of his fire recognized the weight in her wrists. Her wrists did tremble, The court saw age. Maerelle knew better. She had carried too much silence in her bones. Odran stood. The movement sent a ripple through the court. Sava glanced at him quickly, almost with alarm, but he did not descend. He only watched Maerelle with a frown, as if something about the way she held the hammer disturbed him. Perhaps once he would have known. Perhaps once he would have crossed the steps and taken the weight from her hands before pride could stop him. That man had burned away year by year, and Maerelle had apparently been the fuel. She struck the Mourning Kiln. The sound was not iron against clay. It was a dragon crying inside a wall. Every torch in the Ash Kiln Court bent blue. The court screamed. A crack opened down the kiln's black face, thin as a hair at first, then widening into a glowing red wound. Heat rolled out, but it carried no smoke. It smelled of rain on old stone fever, sweat-burnt letters, and the bitter tea Maerelle had drunk through nights when no one remembered she needed sleep. Sava staggered backward. "No," the potteress whispered. Maerelle heard her. So did Odran. His head turned toward Sava. Before he could speak, the kiln cracked again. Something small pushed through the glowing seam. A claw. Not flesh, clay. The first dragon crawled out of the Mourning Kiln no larger than Maerelle's hand. Its body shaped from black-red earth, its wings thin as fired porcelain, its eyes burning soft gold. It dragged something behind it in its mouth, a tiny ring of light trembling like a captured year. It came down the kiln face slowly. The court did not move. The little clay dragon reached Maerelle's feet, bowed its head, and placed the glowing ring on the ash-stained stone before her. The light opened. Maerelle saw herself at 29, kneeling beside Odran's fever bed, both palms blistered from holding his burning hand, while Sava poured ash water into the Mourning Kiln behind her. Odran saw it too. His face changed. Not enough for forgiveness, enough for fear. The clay dragon opened its tiny mouth. A voice came from the ring of light. Maerelle's own voice, younger and hoarse with exhaustion. "Take the year, if it keeps him breathing." The court went silent in a way no command could have created. Maerelle could not breathe. She remembered the fever. She remembered Odran's skin scorching through cloth, remembered Sava saying the kiln required morning heat, remembered asking what price remembered. No answer. She did not remember saying those words aloud. The clay dragon nudged the glowing year toward her. The light touched Maerelle's bare wrist. Pain went through her like a closed door, opening inside bone. She dropped the hammer. Odran took one step down from the throne. Sava moved faster. "Do not touch it, my king." The warning was too sharp. Too afraid. Maerelle looked at the potteress. Sava's expression had already smoothed itself back into courtly concern, but one hand had gone to the kiln keys at her waist, clutching them so hard her knuckles whitened. The kiln cracked a third time. Then, a fourth. From the black mouth of the Mourning Kiln came another clay dragon. Then another. Then 5 more. Tiny bodies crawled through red light and ash, each carrying a ring of stolen glow. They spilled down the kiln like memories, learning to walk. Some were bright gold. Some were pale blue. Some flickered weakly, as if they had been nearly spent. They were not pets. They were not blessings. They were years made witness. The court backed away from Maerelle. For the first time in years, it was not because she looked old. It was because something old had begun to answer her. Odran descended another step. Maerelle. Her name in his mouth hurt more than the magic. She lifted one hand before he could come closer. "No." He stopped. The court saw the Dragon King obey his cast-off queen. Maerelle looked down at the clay dragons, gathering around her feet, each one carrying a piece of her life the court had called duty. Her voice, when it came, did not shake. "No one touches them," she said, "until every year is named." Sava's face went pale beneath her ash paint. The Mourning Kiln split open from crown to base, and from inside its red-black throat, dozens of clay dragons began crawling into the court. Dozens of clay dragons crawled from the broken Mourning Kiln, and scattered across the Ash Kiln Court like years learning how to breathe. They were small enough to crush. That was why the court stepped back. Each one carried a ring of light. Some held the rings in their little fired clay mouths. Some dragged them by claw. Some wore them around cracked necks like collars forged from memory. None of them looked at the nobles first. They came to Maerelle. Savadrex recovered before the rest of the court. Her hand snapped to the chain of kiln keys at her waist, and the keys chimed sharp enough to cut through the panic. "Contain them," she ordered. "No unverified kiln manifestation may cross the ash line." 2 kiln guards lifted hooked iron rods. Odran's voice struck before the rods lowered. "No one touches the dragons." The guards froze. The nearest clay dragon turned its tiny head toward him. Its gold eyes pulsed once as if it had heard a debt acknowledge its own name. Sava's face tightened. "My king, these are unstable remnants. If they scatter, they are carrying years," Odran said. The court went silent. Maerelle looked at him. He stood 1 step below the dragonbone throne, black cloak hanging still around him, one gloved hand half raised. His face was hard, but not untouched. That made anger rise in her sharper than grief. "You protect the proof now," she said, "because you failed the woman then." Odran did not answer. Good. She had no use for his defense yet. Sava stepped forward, her pale robes whispering over the ash-stained stone. Queen Maerelle consented to ash rites. Every royal consort signs preservation vows. Years given to the Mourning Kiln are spent. They cannot be returned. They cannot be paraded through court as accusation. Maerelle looked down at the clay dragons surrounding her bare hem. They were not pets. They were not blessings. They were year witnesses. "Read who recorded these years as failure," she said. The first clay dragon placed its glowing ring on the floor. Light opened. The court saw a fever chamber. Younger Maerelle knelt beside Odran's bed, both sleeves burned to the elbow, both palms wrapped around his right hand, while blue fire crawled beneath his skin. Behind her, Sava stood beside the Mourning Kiln, with a bowl of ash water and a stylus. Maerelle's younger voice came from the ring hoarse and almost broken. "Take the year if it keeps him breathing." Odran went still. Then another voice answered from the record, colder than memory. 1 year withdrawn from consort vitality. Royal survival stabilized. Public amendment queen failed to renew royal fire, without kiln assistance. A sound moved through the court. Not pity, not yet. Recognition trying to survive shame. Maerelle stared at the light. "That was the year you told them I weakened the fire." Sava's chin lifted. The court needed confidence. The king needed breath. The little clay dragon bowed its head, then pushed the year ring toward Maerelle's feet. Odran took half a step forward. Maerelle did not look at him. "Do not touch what you did not pay for." He stopped. The second dragon came with a pale blue ring flickering between its teeth. Its body was cracked along one side, as if famine had baked it too quickly. The light opened into the winter of the ash hunger. The Ash Kiln Court appeared colder, younger, frightened. Braziers guttered. Nobles shouted beyond sealed doors. Maerelle stood alone before the Mourning Kiln forehead, pressed to black clay, whispering the names of every house that would freeze if the court fire died. Her younger voice trembled through the ring. "Take the year if the court wakes warm." Then the record spoke. 1 year withdrawn to sustain common flame. Public amendment queen's weak stewardship prolonged ash famine. Several older nobles lowered their eyes. They had survived that winter with warm halls and full kitchens. Maerelle remembered them calling her cold the following spring. The clay dragon's wings opened with a sound like thin pottery cracking. A line of pale ash ran from the memory to the boots of 3 nobles who had signed the failure report. Sava's voice sharpened. Those amendments prevented disorder. Maerelle turned toward her. "No. They taught the court to eat my years and call me insufficient. Odran's jaw flexed. Still, he said nothing. The third dragon crawled out from between the others more slowly. Its ring was not gold or blue. It was dim, rose soft as flesh, and the sight of it made Maerelle's breath leave her. Odran saw her face change. This time he did not move at all. The light opened into a bedchamber with the curtains drawn. No bells, no priest song, no cradle fire. Maerelle lay against blood-dark sheets, one hand clenched around a strip of Odran's black cloak. Sava stood beside the bed with a kiln bowl under Maerelle's shaking fingers. The court understood too late what it was seeing. Maerelle's younger voice came out barely alive. "If mourning is all I have left, take it. Keep the court fire from dying before the war council." Odran's face lost color. The record followed. 1 year withdrawn from grief heat. Public amendment queen consumed by private sorrow. Ceremonial authority reduced. Maerelle closed her eyes for one breath. Only one. When she opened them, she looked at Sava. "You took my childless grief and made it evidence that I was unfit to stand beside him." Sava's mouth hardened. A queen's sorrow cannot endanger a throne. A queen's sorrow kept your throne burning. The clay dragons stirred. Dozens of tiny heads lifted. Maerelle felt them waiting, each carrying another year the court had renamed duty weakness, decline, instability failure. Her voice grew steadier. "If my years kept this court alive, then this court will hear their names." Sava laughed softly, but fear had thinned it. "And after all this theater, will you demand the king make you young again? Will you ask the kiln to return what survival already spent?" "No," Maerelle said. "I will demand that no one calls the cost ugly after they have eaten from it." Behind the red ash silk screen, the new bride's veil trembled. Everyone turned. A clay dragon no larger than a sparrow had slipped past the ash line. Unlike the others, its body was smooth, fresh, and uncracked. The ring in its mouth did not glow with memory. It shone untouched, future bright. Sava made a small, broken sound. The little dragon crawled straight toward Lady Izerin's hidden veil, carrying a year that had not happened yet. The red ash silk screen trembled before anyone behind it screamed. A small clay dragon climbed the lower edge of the new bride's veil, its fresh body shining as if it had just been shaped by a careful hand. No crack marked its wings, no ash scar crossed its back. The ring in its mouth glowed with a clean light that made Maerelle's stolen years look old beside it. Future had a different color. It was cruelly bright. Lady Izerin Vale stepped backward behind the screen, but the veil caught on the dragon's claw. The court saw one pale hand clutch the silk. Young, ringless, afraid. Sava moved first, not toward Maerelle, toward the bride. "Do not let it touch her," the potteress snapped. Odran turned his head slowly. Why, Sava's eyes flashed. "Because unspent years are volatile." Maerelle felt the words pass through the court like cold smoke. Unspent. Not stolen. Not taken. Not priced. Unspent. She looked at the little dragon clinging to the veil. "Read it." Sava's face hardened. No. The clay dragon opened its mouth anyway. The ring did not show memory. It showed preparation. A chamber of white clay jars appeared in the air, each sealed with red ash wax. Sava stood among them at a narrow table, writing with a bone stylus. Beside her lay a bridal comb, a veil pin, a bowl of milk-white glaze, and a narrow strip of parchment marked with Maerelle's name. Lady Izerin gasped behind the screen. The year ring spoke in Sava's recorded voice. Renewal vessel approved. Youth preservation to begin after first public presentation. Then another line followed colder and older from court law. Future year reserved against former queen's exhausted value. Maerelle went still. Not because she did not understand. Because she did. "They were not only taking what I had already given," she said. "You were using me to buy her youth before she even entered the court." Sava lifted her chin. The court requires renewal. A bride must look like fire, not ash. The words cut the room open. For the first time, Lady Iserin pushed the red silk aside herself. She was beautiful, yes, but beauty had been dressed around her like armor she had not chosen. Gold powder brightened her cheekbones. Red ash jewels pinned her hair. Her white veil shook in her hand. I did not consent to, that she whispered. Sava did not even look at her. Your consent was included in your house contract. Maurelle's eyes did not leave Sava. And mine. You signed preservation vows. I signed to protect the court from death, Maerelle said. Not to become a quarry for another woman's face. A clay dragon near her feet struck its tail against the stone. The sound was tiny. The silence after it was not. Odran stepped down another stair. His gaze had moved from the bride to Maerelle, then to the little dragon still holding the future year. Something violent lived behind his control now. Sava, he said, how many jars? The potteress smiled without warmth. My king, do not ask questions whose answers will make you appear ignorant of your own court. That landed. The court heard it. So did Maerelle. Sava had sharpened the truth into a shield. Odran had not known the details, perhaps, but not knowing had served him. His fire had strengthened. His throne had steadied. His court had blamed Maerelle while warming itself at the years she lost. Maerelle looked at him. She is not wrong. Odran's jaw tightened. Maerelle's voice remained quiet. Your ignorance sat on a throne. The dragon mark beneath his glove flared. He looked as if he wanted the words to wound him less. They did not. The fresh clay dragon dropped from Iserin's veil and crawled toward Maerelle, dragging the future bright ring across the ash-stained floor. It stopped between the two women, the cast-off queen and the bride, prepared to replace her. Then it placed the ring down. The light opened wider. This time, the court saw the War Council chamber. 5 years earlier, Odran's throne stood empty while he rode north to crush rebellion. Rival dragon houses filled the hall, demanding proof that Thale fire still ruled. Maerelle stood behind the throne with both hands on a portable ash vessel from the Mourning Kiln. Her hair was darker then, but silver already threaded the temples. Sava stood at the record table. Maurelle's younger voice spoke through clenched teeth. Take the year if the throne stands until he returns. The court saw the braziers flare, saw rival lords lower their eyes, saw Thale survive the council without Odran in the room. Then Sava's record answered. Queen visibly aged during regency interval. Court confidence damaged by consort decline. Recommend renewal bride search. Lady Iserin covered her mouth. Odran's face changed. The memory did not accuse him with shouting. It did worse. It showed him absent while Maerelle paid for his crown. Maerelle turned to Sava. That was when you began searching for her. Sava's expression did not break. That was when I accepted that survival required beauty the court could believe in. You mean youth. I mean symbol. No, Maerelle said. You mean fuel that still looked pretty while it burned. The clay dragons stirred around her hem, their rings brightening one by one. Sava's hand dropped to her kiln keys. Odran saw the movement. Remove the keys from her. Sava laughed once. You may take keys from my waist, my king, but you cannot unmake preservation law with a command. 2 guards hesitated. The hesitation told Maerelle enough. Sava's authority was not only ceremonial. The kiln answered her office. The ash records answered her hand. Maerelle raised one palm. The guards stopped before Odran could repeat himself. No, she said. Let her keep them. Odran looked at her. Maerelle did not soften. If she still has power, let the years show where it goes. The clay dragons turned as one toward Sava's keys. For the first time, the potteress stepped back. The fresh dragon at Maerelle's feet opened its mouth again, and the future bright ring split into 2 flames. One flame curled toward Iserin. The other crawled toward Maerelle's shadow. The court watched both lights connect. Then the Mourning Kiln spoke, not through memory, but through the crack in its black clay throat, renewal bride preserved by remaining queen years. Odran went completely still. Maerelle looked down at her own shadow. It was thinning at the edges. The floor beneath Maurelle's feet began to show through her shadow. Not completely. Not yet. But where her shadow touched the ash-stained stone, it no longer held its shape. The edges frayed, like old silk held too long near flame. Thin gray light leaked through it, and every clay dragon in the court lowered its head toward that weakening darkness. Lady Izren stepped back from the red ash screen, her bridal veil hanging loose in her hand. "I was told she had already failed," she whispered. No one answered her. Savadrex did. "That is not your concern." The girl flinched. Maurelle's eyes stayed on the thinning shadow. She had seen her hair silver. She had felt strength leave her bones in slow, court-approved pieces. But this was different. This was not age. This was theft still happening. The future bright ring pulsed once between the two women. Odran descended the last step from the throne. Sava lifted her kiln keys. "My king. One more step risks breaking the preservation balance." Odran did not stop. "What balance?" "The one that keeps your court alive." The answer was too smooth, too practiced. A clay dragon with one cracked wing crawled toward Odran's boots and placed its year ring on the stone between them. Maerelle felt the ring before it opened. A pull behind her ribs. A tug from old nights she had mistaken for exhaustion. The light spread. The court saw Odran after the Eastern War, standing shirtless before the Mourning Kiln, while healers wrapped his burned arm. His dragon mark was dark, almost dead beneath the skin. Sava stood at his side with a kiln ledger while Maerelle slept in a chair nearby, face hollow with fever watch. Sava's younger voice spoke from the memory. "The king's fire cannot hold without a living consort anchor." Odran's voice followed rough with pain. "Use the right, if it keeps Thale from falling." Maerelle went cold. Odran's face changed before the record finished. "I did not know what that meant." Sava turned on him. "You did not ask." The court heard the blade inside the truth. The year ring answered with the record. Consort years approved as royal fire support. Public amendment queen's decline caused by natural grief and age. Odran stared at the glowing words as if they had opened inside his chest. Maerelle looked at him. "You sign the door." She chose what walked through it. His jaw tightened. "Maerelle, no." The word stopped him more completely than any guard could have. "I will not comfort you, because the cost finally has my face." Sava's smile returned thin and sharp. "At last Her Majesty speaks sense. The king authorized preservation. I administered it. The court survived. The years were spent lawfully." Maerelle turned toward her, then read the law. Sava went still. The clay dragons turned their heads, every fired clay eye burning gold. Maerelle lifted the broken keyline hammer from the floor. "Read the part that says a queen's years may be taken after she is set aside." Sava's grip tightened on the keys. No answer came. Odran's voice lowered. "There is no such clause." Sava snapped. "There is emergency extension under renewal transition." "Read it," Maerelle said. A small dragon climbed onto the hem of Sava's robe and dropped a pale ring onto her shoe. The light opened into the ash record chamber. Sava stood alone before rows of white clay jars. She scraped Maurelle's name from one column and rewrote it under another. Former queen, residual vitality source, bride preservation bridge. Lady Izren made a small sound behind her veil. Maerelle did not look away. Bridge. Sava lifted her chin. "Only until the new bond stabilizes." "You mean until she looks young enough to make the court forget what I look like after saving it?" No one laughed now. Odran pulled the glove from his right hand. The dragon mark beneath it flared black gold, but the fire was not whole. Fine cracks ran through the scales under his skin, and in each crack, Maerelle saw the same pale glow carried by the clay dragons. Her years. under his fire. The sight struck the court harder than any accusation. Odran looked down at his own hand, as if it had become a stranger. Then he closed his fist. Cut it out. Sava's eyes widened. If we sever the support now, every court flame tied to Thale blood may collapse. Cut it out. Maerelle stepped between them. Odran stopped. For the first time that night, rage almost broke through his control. Move. No. His eyes burned. You think I will keep wearing what was stolen from you. I think if you tear it out before the court hears the full record, they will say I killed the fire out of bitterness. The words landed. Odran's anger did not fade. It learned where to stand. Maerelle turned to the clay dragons. Name the remaining years. Sava's face hardened. I forbid it under potteress authority. The kiln answered before any dragon could. Its cracked black throat glowed red. Authority disputed by unpaid source. The court recoiled. Sava lifted the keys and struck them against her palm. The sound rang through the Ash Kiln Court, and every clay dragon stiffened. One by one, their little bodies began turning back toward the Mourning Kiln. Maerelle felt the pull at once. Her shadow thinned further. Odran stepped toward Sava. This time, Maerelle did not stop him. He caught the chain of kiln keys before Sava could strike them again. The keys burned through his bare hand. He did not let go. Sava smiled through her fear. Those keys answer only to the office. No, Maerelle said, watching the clay dragons tremble between command and witness. They answer to what fed them. She knelt and placed her palm against her thinning shadow. The clay dragons stopped. The court held its breath. From the deepest crack in the Mourning Kiln, something larger moved. Not a tiny year witness. A heavy clay dragon with black gold wings dragged itself into the court, carrying a ring so bright, Maerelle had to look away. Odran did not. The ring rolled to his feet and opened. Inside, it burned the first line of the original preservation vow. Royal fire deficit to be paid by Maerelle Voss. The black gold ring did not open like the others. It did not show a room at first, or a younger Maerelle, or some private hour the court had renamed weakness. It hovered above the ash-stained stone, and turned slowly heavy with a fire that made every torch in the Ash Kiln Court lean away. Maerelle felt its heat under her skin. Not memory. Foundation. Savadrex looked at the ring as if it had crawled from a grave she had personally sealed. Odran still held the burning kiln keys in his bare hand. Smoke rose from his palm, but he did not release them. The dragon mark under his skin flickered black gold, answering the ring with a sick, uneven pulse. Maerelle looked at the large clay dragon crouched beside the light. Read it from the beginning. Sava's voice snapped. No. The ring opened. A younger court appeared in the air, brighter and less ash-stained. Maerelle stood before the Mourning Kiln on her bonding day, her hair dark, her shoulders straight, her face still soft with a hope she had not yet learned to hide. Odran stood beside her, in black ceremonial armor, not tender but watchful in the way he had been then, as if guarding the world from touching what belonged near him. The memory hurt because it had once been real. A priest held out the preservation vow. Young Maerelle signed first. Her voice came from the ring. I share ceremonial fire with Thale. I stand beside the royal flame in famine, war, and mourning. The court listened. Sava's eyes narrowed. The ring showed the parchment clearly. The line ended there. Maerelle lifted her chin. That is what I signed. The large clay dragon struck one heavy claw against the stone. The memory shifted. The same parchment appeared later in the ash record chamber. Maerelle was gone. Odran was gone. Sava stood alone beneath shelves of sealed clay jars, the kiln keys at her waist. She opened the margin beside Maerelle's signature and wrote in red ash ink, Consort vitality may be converted to royal fire support under preservation deficit. A murmur broke through the court. Sava's face hardened. Emergency margin law is lawful. Maerelle did not blink. Lawful is not the same as named. Odran's voice was low. I never saw that margin. Sava turned on him. You saw survival. You accepted survival. Do not pretend disgust now, because the price has learned to speak. The words struck true enough to leave silence behind them. Maerelle looked at Odran. He did not defend himself. The ring continued. Another memory opened Odran, fever-burned after the Eastern War, barely standing, one hand pressed to the Mourning Kiln. Sava held a preservation order before him. Odran's younger voice came rough with pain. Use whatever right keeps the royal fire alive. The record answered. Royal consent obtained. Consort source activated. Maerelle felt the court look at him. So did he. Odran's fist tightened around the keys until the metal bent. I gave command without asking what it would take. Maerelle's throat closed, but her voice stayed clear. Yes. He looked at her then. No throne. No excuse. No soft apology trying to make itself useful. Just the first full shape of guilt. Maerelle turned away before it could become something the court mistook for healing. Read what was taken under that command. The large clay dragon lowered its head. Around the court, the smaller year witnesses lifted their rings. One by one, lights rose into the air. Gold for fever, blue for famine, rose for grief, copper for sleepless nights, white for court fires, gray for mornings when Maerelle had woken older and been told she was simply tired. The rings arranged themselves in a circle above the cracked Mourning Kiln. Then the black gold ring spoke in the cold voice of record. 23 years withdrawn. Royal fire stabilized. Queen's visible decline recorded as personal failure. The number did not echo. It settled. 23. Not a feeling, not bitterness, not vanity. A measure. The court had spent 23 years of her life and called the cost age. Lady Izran stepped fully from behind the red ash screen veil gathered in both hands. Her face was pale beneath the bridal powder. I will not wear years stolen from her, she said. Sava turned on her with contempt. You will wear what keeps your house alive. The girl flinched but did not retreat. Maerelle watched her for one breath. Not ally, not enemy. Another woman brought to the kiln before she understood the shape of the fire. Sava lifted her chin toward the court. Listen carefully. Spent years cannot be returned. The only question is whether Thale survives the transition. If Maerelle's remaining vitality is not bridged into renewal, the court fire collapses, the rival houses descend, and every noble here will beg for the warmth they now pretend to regret. Fear moved through the court faster than shame. Maerelle saw it. So did Odran. Survival was the oldest leash. Odran stepped toward the Mourning Kiln, then let it collapse before it feeds on her again. No, Maerelle said. He stopped at once. She hated that obedience could still touch something wounded in her. She pointed toward the floating rings. If you break the fire before the records are named, they will say, I destroyed Thale out of spite. I have carried enough of their convenient stories. The clay dragons rustled around her hem, fired wings clicking softly. Maerelle faced the court. Every year will be named before any flame is touched. Sava smiled thinly. You may not have that long. The words made the Mourning Kiln glow. Maerelle's shadow thinned again. This time the loss reached her knees. Odran's control cracked. The large clay dragon turned its black gold head toward the Dragon King. Slowly, it opened its wings. Beneath one wing hidden against its clay ribs was another ring. Smaller than the rest. Darker. Still burning. It rolled across the stone, not toward Maerelle, not toward Sava, not toward the bride. It rolled to Odran's feet. The ring opened against his shadow. Inside, a single line of fire appeared. Final Queen Year, reserved inside Royal Flame. Odran's shadow caught fire before his body did. Black gold flame crawled along the stone at his feet, circling the dark little ring that had rolled from beneath the clay dragon's wing. The Ash Kiln Court leaned away from the heat, but Maerelle stepped closer. Not because she was brave, because part of her life was burning inside it. The ring opened wider against Odran's shadow. This time, the memory did not show Maerelle kneeling, grieving, or whispering permission into pain. It showed the royal fire chamber beneath the throne. Odran stood at the center unconscious, his dragon mark split open across his hand like a wound in black glass. Sava Drex knelt beside him with the kiln keys pressed to his palm. Behind her, a clay jar glowed with Maerelle's name. Sava's recorded voice filled the court. Final queen year reserved inside royal flame. To be released upon second bonding, if former queen's vitality falls below renewal threshold. Lady Iserin covered her mouth. Odran stared at the ring, as if it had named him a grave. Maerelle understood before he did. The new bride had not merely been prepared to replace her. The second bonding would finish her. Sava's voice sharpened into the silence. The court required a bridge. The king's fire was unstable. The bride's line was untested. Maerelle's final queen year ensured the transition would not fail. Maerelle turned toward her. My last year was stored inside him. Your last useful year, Sava said. Odran moved so suddenly that the guards flinched. He seized the dark ring with his bare hand. Fire roared up his arm. Maerelle caught his wrist before he could crush it. Pain shot through her fingers, but she held on. His eyes dropped to her hand on him. Let go, he said. No, it is yours, and you will not destroy the only witness left, because guilt finally made you impatient. The word stopped him. His jaw worked once, but he opened his hand. The ring fell back to the stone. Maerelle released him and stepped away before the court could turn the touch into something softer than it was. She would not let them make romance from a wound still open. She looked down at the large black gold clay dragon. Show who authorized release. Sava's face went still. The ring answered. The memory shifted to the ash record chamber. Sava stood before a table of bridal objects. White veil, red ash comb, dragon line contract, and a bowl of milk-white glaze. She dipped her stylus into the glaze and wrote 3 names. Odran Thale, Iserin Vale, Maerelle Voss. Then she scraped Maerelle's name lower beneath the other 2. Former Queen Vitality Residual Source. Release condition. Bride presentation. Public explanation. Age collapse. A hiss moved through the court. Age collapse. Maerelle almost smiled. Of course. Even her death had already been given a polite name. Iserin stepped from behind the screen, fully now veil dragging behind her like a surrendered flag. You meant for her to fall tonight. Sava looked at the girl as if she had become inconvenient furniture. I meant for the court to survive its own fire. No, Maerelle said. You meant for me to break in public so no one would ask what killed me. The clay dragons struck their tiny claws against the stone, one by one. Click, click, click. Not applause. Judgment. Odran's voice came low. How long Sava did not pretend not to understand. Since the Eastern War, the answer made the court shift. Odran looked at Maerelle. 23 years stood between them. Not distance. Debt. He spoke as if each word cut through his throat. You were being emptied while I thought you were leaving me. Maerelle looked back at him. I was being emptied while you let them call it failure. He closed his eyes once. When he opened them, the king was still there. But the man behind him had been struck. Sava lifted her hands slightly palms outward, the gesture of a court officer making legal defense. Enough. Every royal line survives by unpleasant structure. You all warmed yourselves at Thale fire. You signed Ash confidence reports. You welcomed renewal. Do not stand now and tremble because the source has a face. The court did not answer. Sava was not wrong enough to be dismissed easily. That was her danger. Maerelle turned slowly, looking at the nobles, the priests, the guards, the bride, the king. Then let every signer be named. The clay dragons stirred. Sava snapped. I forbid public signer exposure under preservation secrecy. The Mourning Kiln cracked again. Its red-black throat glowed like an opened wound. Secrecy challenged by unpaid source. Odran stepped beside Maerelle, not in front of her. No seal outranks the source. Sava's eyes flashed. "You do not know what you are breaking." Maerelle did, or at least she understood the shape of it. Once the signers were named, the court could no longer hide behind Sava alone. Every noble who had benefited every priest who had amended record, every officer who had praised renewal while watching Maerelle fade, would stand in the firelight of what they had chosen not to ask. The dark ring lifted from the stone. Around the hall, clay dragons began carrying their year rings toward the center, forming a circle around Maerelle and Odran. Names appeared in the air. As marks not letters the court could deny, house seals, priest cords, kiln stamps, council ash rings. Lord Colvin lowered his head. Priestess Varya covered her seal hand. 3 counselors stepped back too late. Maerelle watched them all. She had thought Sava stole her years alone. Now she saw the court had helped by enjoying the silence. Sava's voice cut through the rising dread. "If you expose the full signer's circle, the royal fire will seek payment from every house tied to it." The clay dragons froze. That was not a threat. That was a rule. The flames in every wall brazier flickered. Odran looked at the watching nobles, then at Maerelle. The choice had finally reached the room. Protect the court from the cost, or let the cost return to those who had hidden it. Maerelle lifted her chin. Then let the fire know where it ate. The Mourning Kiln answered with a roar. Every clay dragon opened its mouth at once, and the years began turning toward the nobles who had signed her life away. The wall braziers bent toward the guilty houses. Not all at once. One flame leaned left toward Lord Colvin and the 3 rings on his hand. Another turned blue before Priestess Varya. A third lowered until its fire almost touched the seal brooch of an Ash counselor who had not spoken since the kiln broke. The court understood then that silence had signatures. Maerelle stood at the center of the clay dragons and felt the pull of every year around her. They wanted to move, not with hunger, with accounting. That frightened her more than rage would have. Sava saw the hesitation and seized it. "Command them back," she said. "If the fire seeks payment from every signer, you will not punish only nobles. Their houses feed guards. Their guards feed kitchens. Their kitchens feed children. Is that your justice, Maerelle? A court freezing because you want your youth mourned." The words struck exactly where Sava aimed them. Maerelle had spent too many years keeping people warm to pretend the threat did not matter. Odran stepped beside her. "Do not answer her as if mercy belongs to the thief." Maerelle looked at him. "And do not speak as if the throne is separate from the theft." He accepted the blow. Before the court. That mattered, but not enough. The clay dragons weighted tiny bodies, glowing rings bright in their mouths. Around the room, noble seals and priest cords burned in the air like exposed wounds. Maerelle lifted one hand. The dragons stilled. "Not children," she said. "Not servants. Not kitchens. Not the old who never signed." Sava's mouth tightened. Maerelle turned slowly, making the entire court hear her. "Only those whose seals bought warmth with my years," the Mourning Kiln answered from its broken throat. "Debt restricted to named signers." A sharp breath passed through the court. Lord Colvin stepped back. The flame followed him. "I signed what the potteress placed before me," he said. "We were told the Queen's decline endangered confidence." Maerelle looked at him. "And when your halls stayed warm," his mouth shut, a small clay dragon crawled to his feet and placed a copper ring on the stone. The light opened. Not a memory of Maerelle this time. A dining hall, Colvin House in midwinter, long tables bright with fire, children asleep beside hearths, wine steaming, servants carrying roasted meat through golden warmth. Then the record spoke. 3 winter nights sustained by withdrawn queen year. Public signer statement Queen Maerelle's weakening harmed court morale. Colvin's face collapsed inward. The ring did not burn him. It climbed his seal ring and left a thin clay mark across the metal. Named debtor. Not punished. Named. That was worse for a man who had survived by being respectable. Another dragon moved to Priestess Varya. Its pale ring showed temple hands sealing Maerelle's mourning chamber, after the loss she was not allowed to name. Varya had signed the reduction of ceremonial authority, while lighting the public altar with grief heat drawn from Maerelle's body. Varya whispered I believed Sava's record. Maerelle's voice remained even. Belief is not payment. The clay ring marked the priestess's cord, named debtor. Odran's bare hand still bled around the kiln keys. The fire in his dragon mark flickered, each time a debtor mark appeared, as if his own power felt pieces of itself being pulled into judgment. He looked down at the mark, then at Maerelle. Begin with me. The court froze. Sava went pale with anger. My King Odran did not look at her. My fire took more than any house. Maerelle's heart twisted once. She hated it. He was saying the right thing now, in front of everyone with blood on his hand and debt under his skin. But 23 years had taught her that late truth did not become early protection, simply because a king finally found his voice. No, she said. His gaze sharpened. Not because you are innocent, Maerelle said. Because kings have always made themselves the center of the wound. The record begins where the theft began. She turned to the Mourning Kiln. With Sava, the clay dragons turned. All of them. Sava's court mask finally cracked. She lifted the keys by instinct, then remembered Odran held them burning through his own palm. For one terrible breath, she looked almost naked without their sound. Then she smiled. You think I was foolish enough to sign myself as debtor? The Mourning Kiln glowed darker. Sava stepped backward toward the ash record table. I kept the court alive. I preserved the king. I protected the future bride. I maintained the line while all of you enjoyed noble ignorance. Potterous authority does not borrow. It administers. Maerelle felt the trap before it showed itself. The large, black-gold clay dragon lowered its head and dragged one heavy wing across the stone. A new ring rolled out from beneath its body, dull and white as bone. It opened at Sava's feet. The ash record chamber appeared again. Rows of clay jars. Maerelle's name on dozens. But none bore Sava's. Instead, every jar was marked with the same phrase, royal necessity. Sava's smile widened. There. The court's survival absorbed the charge. You cannot make one officer pay for necessity. Odran's voice was deadly quiet. You hid behind my crown. I used your crown as crowns are meant to be used. The clay dragons hissed a small, dry sound, like cracking pottery. Maerelle stared at the words royal necessity, until they blurred. Not from tears. From fury made precise. She had seen this before in softer forms. Duty, stability, renewal, confidence, necessity. Every clean word a cloth over a body. She knelt before the bone-white ring. Odran moved slightly as if to stop her, then forced himself still. Good. He was learning. Maerelle placed both hands on the ash-stained stone. Then read who fed necessity. The kiln did not answer immediately. The court waited. Sava's smile faltered. A sound came from inside the broken Mourning Kiln. Not a crack. A turning. Deep within its red-black throat, hidden clay gears began grinding after years of silence. The sleeping dragon carvings around the kiln mouth opened their tiny eyes. The bone-white ring split. Light poured upward. A final chamber appeared lower than the ash records, lower than the kiln floor, a place Maerelle had never seen. In that chamber stood a row of sealed jars larger than the rest, blackened by old fire. The first jar bore the mark of royal necessity. The clay dragon struck it with one claw. The mark burned away. Beneath it was Sava Drex's kiln seal. The court gasped. The second jar burned clean. Sava's seal. The third, Sava's seal. Every hidden jar that had named necessity was hers. Maerelle rose slowly. Sava looked at the jars, then at the court, and for the first time she seemed truly afraid. The Mourning Kiln spoke in a voice like fired clay splitting open, potterous debt concealed under crown necessity. All borrowed years held in private kiln reserve. Odran took one step toward Sava. She backed into the ash record table. Maerelle did not move. Her eyes were on the hidden chamber, because behind Sava's jars something else was waking, not a small year witness, not even the black gold dragon. A shape larger than the kiln mouth, pressed against the inner dark its body made, of all the years that had never reached the court. And when its eyes opened, they were Maerelle's. The Ash Kiln Court forgot how to speak. Something vast pressed against the broken mouth of the Mourning Kiln, too large for the opening, too patient to be stopped by it. Black-red clay cracked around its shoulders. Gold fire pulsed through its wings. Around its throat hung dozens of year rings, fused together into one heavy collar. The little clay dragons lowered themselves to the floor. Not in worship, in recognition. Maerelle stood very still as the larger dragon dragged one claw into the court. Its eyes were not exactly hers. They were what her eyes had been before the court taught them to endure. Savadrex whispered, "That cannot leave the reserve." Odran turned toward her. "What reserve?" The giant clay dragon answered, by striking its claw against the stone. A lower chamber appeared in the air, the hidden place beneath the kiln, where Sava's private jars stood behind the burned-away label of royal necessity. Each jar glowed from within, not with ash, with years. A record voice spoke from the chamber, private kiln reserve maintained from unused consort withdrawals. Source Maerelle Voss. Purpose renewal continuity. Lady Iserin made a faint sound behind her veil. Maerelle did not look at the girl. She looked at the jars. Unused. The word carved through her more deeply than stolen. Some of her years had not even been spent keeping the court alive. They had been stored, held, hidden, kept like coin, until Sava decided which face deserved to wear them. Maerelle's voice came low. "How many?" The giant dragon opened its mouth. 7 rings fell from its collar and rolled across the stone. 7. The court stared at them as if they were living hearts. Sava straightened. Fear had passed through her, but calculation returned quickly. Those years cannot simply be returned. A body altered by kiln withdrawal may fracture under sudden restoration. The reserve must be administered by office. Maerelle almost laughed. Even now, Sava wanted the keys. "No," Maerelle said. "You will not manage the return of what you stole." Sava's eyes sharpened. "Then perhaps you would prefer to die from your own pride." Odran moved. Fire snapped from his bare hand as he stepped between Sava and the 7 rings. The kiln keys still burned into his palm glowed red around his fingers. Sava's mouth curled. "Careful, my king. If you shield her from the law, now the rival houses will call this sentiment not justice." Odran did not look back. "Let them," No Maerelle said. He stopped. She walked past him close enough to feel the heat coming from his wounded hand. "Do not make this a king rescuing what he helped ruin." His face tightened. Good. The truth was still standing between them. "It should." Maerelle faced the court. "The years are not returned because he pities me. They are returned because they were never yours." The giant clay dragon lowered its massive head until its burning eyes were level with hers. For one breath, Maerelle saw herself in every ring: fever watch, famine nights, grief rooms, war councils, cold mornings, public smiles, hands steady on a throne that was never steady for her. The dragon pushed the first reserve ring forward. Sava's voice cut in. "If even 1 year returns, the royal fire will lose what it was balanced against." Odran lifted his burned hand. "Then take from me," the court erupted. Maerelle's head snapped toward him. "No." His eyes held hers. "My fire carried your years. and it will not buy absolution by bleeding dramatically in public. A flicker of pain crossed his face. She did not soften. Then quietly he said, "Not absolution. Replacement." The word changed the air. The giant dragon turned toward him. Odran stepped forward and placed his bare, burned hand on the stone beside the first reserve ring. "What my fire kept my fire can answer for." Sava went pale. "You cannot know that. I know whose life it was not." The first reserve ring brightened. Maerelle looked at it, then at the king, who had failed to ask the right questions for 23 years and was now offering fire in place of youth. It was not enough. It could never be enough, but enough was not the question. The question was whether theft would continue. "Read the exchange," Maerelle said. The ring opened. A line of fire appeared between Odran's hand and the year ring. "Royal fire may repay unsupported withdrawal only by voluntary burn. Cost 1 king year for 1 queen year." The court went silent again. This time not from shame, from hunger. They all understood what 7 years meant when counted from a king's life. Odran did not withdraw his hand. Sava's voice trembled with fury. "You would shorten the reign for her," Maerelle answered before he could. "No, he would stop lengthening it with me." The giant dragon placed one claw over Odran's hand. Fire tore up his arm. He went to one knee. Maerelle did not touch him. She wanted to. That angered her most. Instead, she watched until the first ring cracked open and poured light toward her shadow. The frayed edge of her shadow darkened. Not young, whole, only a little. Maerelle inhaled sharply. The court saw it and understood the return was real. Sava screamed enough. She tore a white clay blade from beneath her sleeve and drove it into one of the remaining reserve rings. The ring split. The giant dragon roared. Not from pain. From warning. The shattered year did not fly toward Maerelle. It scattered into ash and raced across the floor toward the red silk screen where Lady Izarin stood frozen. Sava's face shone with terrible triumph. "If the old source refuses administration," she said, "the renewal vessel receives emergency transfer." The broken year rose like a pale flame around Izarin's veil. Maerelle turned cold. Odran struggled to rise, fire still crawling up his arm. But the giant clay dragon was already moving. It opened its wings across the court, and all 7 remaining rings began to burn at once. The veil became a lantern. White silk lifted around Lady Izarin's face as the shattered queen year wrapped itself through the threads, turning bridal cloth into pale flame. She did not scream at first. She stood frozen behind the red ash screen, eyes wide, hands trapped in the burning veil, as if beauty itself had become a cage. Then the heat reached her skin. Maerelle moved before Odran could rise. She crossed the ash line and caught the veil in both hands. The court gasped as the stolen year leapt from silk to her fingers. Pain climbed her arms, familiar as an old room. The Mourning Kiln had taken from her in silence for so long that even agony felt trained to recognize her. Izarin sobbed. "I did not ask for it." "I know," Maerelle said. She pulled. The veil tore free with a sound like parchment ripping in a fire. The pale flame clung to Maerelle's hands instead, trying to crawl toward the thinning edge of her shadow. Sava's face twisted. "Fool, you take it back even now." "No," Maerelle said through her teeth. "I name it." The giant clay dragon lowered its black gold head behind her, and every small year witness turned toward the torn veil in her hands. The shattered year stopped burning, its light flattened into a ring, broken but readable. Maerelle dropped it onto the stone between herself and Izarin. "Read who ordered emergency transfer." The ring opened. The court saw Sava in the hidden reserve chamber carving a clause into the underside of a white clay blade. If former queen resists renewal administration, unused years may be redirected to approved bride vessel. Public explanation bridal fire blessing. Izarin made a broken sound. "Blessing," she whispered. Sava stepped away from the record table, but there was nowhere clean left to stand. Maerelle turned to the young bride. Did your house know? Izaren's eyes filled with terror, then shame. They knew I was chosen for bright blood. They knew the court wanted youth. They did not know the years were yours. Sava laughed sharply. Do not pretend innocence. Every bride wants what age has lost. Izaren straightened. Her hands still shook, but her voice did not. Not if it has a name. The clay dragons stirred. Maerelle looked at the girl for one breath longer. Not ally, not daughter, not rival. A woman placed at the edge of another woman's disappearance and told to call it honor. Step behind me, Maerelle said. Izaren obeyed. The court saw it. So did Odran. Something in his face shifted as he watched the woman he had set aside shield, the bride meant to replace her. It was not admiration. Not yet. Admiration was too cheap for this moment. It was understanding made painful. Odran forced himself to his feet. The voluntary burn still crawled up his arm, black gold fire eating beneath the skin. 1 queen year had returned. 6 reserve rings still burned beneath the giant dragon's wings. Sava's eyes darted toward them. Maerelle saw. You will not break another year. Sava's voice went cold. Then, let the king pay. Let the court watch 7 years come off his reign because an aging queen cannot bear the nature of survival. Odran stepped forward. Yes, Maerelle turned on him. Do not make a performance of sacrifice. It is not performance. It becomes one the moment the court can use it to cleanse you. His expression tightened, but he stopped. Good. She faced the giant clay dragon. Read whether king years can repay without erasing signer debt. The black gold dragon struck 1 claw against the stone. The 6 remaining reserve rings lifted into the air. Fire lines connected them not only to Odran's burned hand, but to every marked debtor in the court. Calvin's ring, Varya's cord council, ash seals, kiln stamps, priest marks, and Sava's hidden jars. The record spoke. Voluntary royal burn may restore stolen source. Signer debt remains. Public debt must still be named. Maerelle looked at Odran. Do you hear it? Yes. You do not buy their silence with your pain. No. You do not buy mine. His eyes held hers. No. Only then did Maerelle step aside. Odran placed his burned hand on the 2nd ring. Fire drove him to 1 knee again. This time he did not hide the pain. He did not turn it into command. He let the court see what repayment looked like when it finally climbed the correct body. The ring cracked. Light streamed toward Maerelle's shadow. Another torn edge darkened, becoming solid again beneath her feet. Her breath hitched. Strength did not flood her back like youth in a song. It returned as steadiness, as weight, as the feeling that the floor had remembered. She belonged on it. A 3rd ring. Odran's jaw clenched hard enough to shake. A 4th. The braziers roared and then dimmed. The court murmured in fear. Sava smiled suddenly. Maerelle saw the smile and went cold. Too late. The 5th ring rose before Odran touched it and flew toward the Mourning Kiln's cracked mouth. Sava had not broken it. She had recalled it. The giant dragon roared and struck at the air, but the ring vanished inside the kiln. Red-black light rushed through the chamber. All the sleeping dragon carvings around the kiln mouth opened their eyes. Sava lifted her chin triumphant through terror. The final reserve belongs to kiln authority. Without Potterus release, the last years stay sealed. Odran reached for the kiln keys, still burned into his palm. Maerelle stopped him with a look. No more king first answers. She walked to the Mourning Kiln. The heat should have driven her back. It did not. The kiln had eaten her years. It knew the shape of her. Maerelle placed both burned hands against the black clay. Sava has the office, she said, but I am the unpaid source. The kiln trembled. Sava's face changed. Maerelle leaned closer, voice low enough that the whole court strained to hear. "Open for what you owe." The Mourning Kiln cracked from its base to its crown. Inside the red-black throat, the missing reserve ring appeared. But it was not alone. Behind it hung hundreds of tiny clay tags, each stamped with a woman's name. The kiln's inner throat rang with the sound of small clay tags striking one another. Not bells. Names. They hung in rows behind the missing reserve ring, hundreds of them each stamped into fired clay by a hand that had preferred records to remembrance. Some were old enough to be dark with soot. Some were pale and newer. A few were cracked down the middle, the names nearly split by heat. Maerelle kept both burned hands against the Mourning Kiln. She did not look away. Savadrex had. For the first time since the kiln broke, the royal potteress looked not frightened, not angry, but exposed beyond strategy. Odran stood behind Maerelle with one arm blackened to the elbow from voluntary burn. He saw the tags. So did Lady Iserin, so did the court. A priest whispered former consorts. The giant clay dragon opened its black gold wings. The little year witnesses spread through the Ash Kiln Court, carrying their rings beneath the names like lamps under a burial wall. Maerelle's voice was quiet. How many, the Mourning Kiln answered. Not through Sava, not through priest law, through the tags. Unpaid sources recorded across 5 reigns. Years withdrawn. Grief heat converted. Visible decline amended as failure. One noble woman fainted. No one moved to catch her quickly. They were too busy looking at the wall of names. Sava found her voice again, but it shook. Every court has preservation rights. Every throne survives by inheritance of structure. Do not pretend Thale is singular in this. Maerelle turned her head. I am not asking whether you were original. The clay dragons lifted their heads. I am asking whether you continued. The kiln glowed. Sava's mouth closed. Odran stepped forward, but not past Maerelle. Bring her to the center. 2 guards seized Sava's arms. She struggled only once. Pride stopped the rest. They dragged her before the opened kiln, where the missing reserve ring burned in the air beside the hundreds of tags. You cannot try the office before its own instrument, Sava said. Maerelle lowered her hands from the kiln. Her palms were red, cracked and dusted in black clay. No, the instrument is trying the office. The giant clay dragon lowered one claw over Sava's shadow. The missing reserve ring dropped to the floor. Sava flinched as if it had struck her skin. The ring opened into the hidden reserve chamber again. This time the court saw Sava younger taking her oath as royal potteress. An older potteress placed the kiln keys around her waist and spoke the old office vow. Preserve the royal flame. Name the source. Return what remains unpaid. Sava repeated the vow. Then the memory shifted. Years later, Sava stood alone over Maerelle's jars, scraping the final line from the ledger. Return what remains unpaid. She replaced it with another phrase. Renewal, continuity. The court heard the scrape of the stylus, as if it were a knife. Maerelle looked at her. You did not preserve law. You erased the part that protected the source. Sava's face hardened. Sources die. Courts remain. No, Maerelle said. Sources die because courts decide remaining is more important than naming. The missing reserve ring rose between them. It turned toward Maerelle, then toward Odran. The record spoke. 6 queen years restored by voluntary royal burn. 1 reserve year sealed under potteress theft. Hundreds of prior source debts unresolved. Odran lifted his burned hand. Take the last from me. Maerelle turned sharply. He did not lower his gaze. Not to cleanse me. Not to end what I owe. To return what is yours before the kiln closes. The court waited for her answer, as if it belonged to them. It did not. Maerelle looked at the last ring. 7 years would not give back 23. 1 king's burn would not return the nights when no one knocked on her door. It would not unwrite every report that called her failure. It would not make her young untouched, unspent. But the year was hers, and she was tired of stolen things remaining in royal hands because return was imperfect. "Do it," she said. Odran placed his burned hand over the final reserve ring. Fire tore through him. This time he made a sound. It was not loud. That made it worse. A broken breath forced between clenched teeth, while black gold flame climbed his neck and lit the dragon mark beneath his skin. The court watched their king lose a year and finally understand that time had weight. The ring cracked. Light streamed across the floor to Maerelle's shadow. Her shadow darkened fully beneath her feet. Not youthful, not untouched. Whole. The court saw her straighten not like a girl restored for a man's regret, but like a woman whose own body had been returned to her jurisdiction. The clay dragons circled her hem. The giant dragon bowed its head. Maerelle did not smile. Sava stared at her. "You think 7 years makes you queen again?" "No," Maerelle said. "I was queen while you were stealing them." Odran's face changed. Pain, yes, but also recognition stripped of romance and pride. He turned to the court. Sava Drex is removed as royal potteress. Her records are seized. Every sign or debt remains open. Every source name will be read into public fire. Sava laughed once sharp and desperate. "And when rival courts hear Thale survived on drained queens, when they come for you," Odran looked at the wall of clay tags, "then they will hear we stopped." Maerelle looked at him. For the first time that night, he did not ask her to soften the cost of his answer. Good. She stepped toward the wall of names. The closest clay tag belonged to a woman she had never known, Althene Moore. The one beside it, Ravia Thale. Then Saloon Voss, Maerelle Drex, Orlane Ash. Not all queens. Consorts. Mourning wives. Fire-bonded widows. Women given to survival and written into decline. Maerelle touched the first tag. A clay dragon carried it down and placed it beside her feet. "Read them," she said. The court remained silent. Odran stepped beside her, still not touching her. "I will read them with you." Maerelle looked at his burned hand, his ruined fire, his face finally awake to the shape of what had kept him alive. "No," she said. His breath stopped. Her voice did not tremble. "You will hear them first." The words struck deeper than refusal. They were a boundary, a sentence, a beginning perhaps, but not a pardon. Odran bowed his head. "As you command." The Ash Kiln Court saw the Dragon King obey the woman he had called failed. Maerelle faced the opened Mourning Kiln. "Althene Moore," she read. The kiln answered with flame. One by one, the clay dragons carried the names from the dark. Behind her, Sava Drex was taken away, with her kiln keys melted into a shapeless black knot. Lady Isran removed her bridal veil and laid it on the ash-stained floor where no stolen year would ever brighten it again. The nobles stood marked by debtor clay, unable to leave, until the court heard what their warmth had cost. Odran remained standing behind Maerelle through every name. Not as savior, not as forgiven husband, as witness. By dawn, the Mourning Kiln no longer glowed red. It glowed gold. Not because it had chosen Maerelle, because for the first time in 5 reigns it had been forced to return what survival had priced and power had hidden. When the last name was read, Maerelle placed the broken Kyline hammer at Odran's feet. "I will not stand beside a throne that needs women to vanish in order to look strong." Odran looked down at the hammer, then at her. "What will you stand beside?" Maerelle turned toward the open court where ash drifted through the first light of morning, and dozens of clay dragons waited with their heads raised. "The truth," she said, "and whatever survives it." She walked down from the kiln steps alone. This time, the court moved aside because she was not old, not failed, not empty, and not waiting to be chosen. She was the source they had not managed to burn.